Perfect.
Cool. All right, go for it.
All right.
Wait, am I the first speaker?
Are you the affirmative side?
Yeah, sorry. Okay. I just had to
No,
connect
you're
my
good.
headphones. Okay, I'll start it off. Adapting to climate change and its imperative response to the profound alterations in our environment resulting from human-induced global warming. As temperature rises, sea levels change, extreme weather events become more frequent, societies worldwide are confronted with urgent need to develop strategies that enhance resilience and minimize the adverse impacts of these transformations. Adaptation involves making adjustments in various sectors, from agriculture and infrastructure to healthcare and urban planning, to better cope with the changing climate and ensure sustainable development. The imperative to adapt to climate change is underscored by compelling data and facts that highlight the severity and scope of the challenges ahead. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, global temperatures have risen by approximately 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, leading to widespread impacts on the ecosystem and human societies. Sea levels are rising at an accelerating rate, posing a threat to low-lying coastal areas and island nations. Extreme weather events such as hurricanes, heat waves, and wildfires have become more intense and frequent, causing devastating consequences for communities and ecosystems. Recognizing these trends, adaptation measures become not just a choice, but a necessity to build resilience in the face of changing climate. Moreover, adapting to climate change is essential for safeguard food security. Changing weather patterns and the increased frequency of extreme events pose risks to agricultural productivity, and the World Bank estimates that the climate change should push over 100 million people into extreme poverty by 2030, primarily due to its impact on agriculture. Adopting climate resilient agriculture practices, such as drought resistant crops and improved water management, is crucial to ensure food security in the face of changing climate. Additionally, investing in resilient infrastructure, such as flood defenses, sustainable urban planning, is essential for protecting communities and economies from the escalating risks associated with climate change. Adapting to climate change is not just an environmental necessity, but a practical and urgent response to the safeguard of well-being in future generations.
Um, okay, so I have a few questions for you.
Yep,
What
I
adverse
hate these.
effects? They're not like really in depth, honestly, but
Yeah, please
um,
no.
where are you gonna get the money for like the new infrastructures and like technology?
Well, I think it's like an urgent enough problem that the government will probably fund us. Um, I mean, I don't think it's like, I don't know. I think it's urgent enough. I mean, this is like, I mean, yeah, I would have to say the government. I don't think the government would sit aside and say no. Um, I just think the plan of adapting needs to be good enough and approved by the government where they're willing to say, okay, yeah, you're right. This sounds like a good idea. We've went through all the processes and side effects or cons of it. And hopefully, they would fund us. I mean, I can't see them not.
Okay, and then my last question is like, why? I know you talked about like safeguarding. Like, why do you think that's like so important?
Um, I mean, mm, okay.
Sorry, guys. I know I'm distracting right now.
Hmm. I mean, it it creates measures to protect health and well-being of human rights, and like if we like fuck, that's a good question. Um,
What
We
was
can
the
move
yeah,
on if you want.
I don't know. I
what
don't
was the
know.
question?
Yeah.
Why do you think safeguarding is like so important?
Well, my thing is I don't know the full definition and meaning of safeguarding, so it's kind of hard for me to answer that. I do know it um, creates measures to um, protect people's health and human rights, and um, I know it especially helps um, more young and vulnerable communities from whether it's like extreme weather events or flooding or their food sources being damaged by climate change. Um, so I don't know. I think they're the number one concern when we look at this problem with climate change. So I mean, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm up next. So, hi, I'm Annika. Today, me and my team will be arguing why the US should not prioritize adaptation to climate change. So, making our world a worse place by producing overwhelming infrastructures and changing to the world is simply just not okay. There are other effective ways to help the planet. So we'll be discussing combat climate change through comprehensive mitigation and adaptation efforts as the impact of a warming planet are existential threats to public health, economic stability, national security, and environmental situations. By prioritizing climate change action, the US can lead the way towards a sustainable future and um, a more resilient and more globally cooperative. And so moving to my first point is economic impact. So according to the National Climate Assessment, the annual cost of damage from climate change in the US could reach hundreds of billions of dollars by the end of the century if emissions continue. So in total, extreme weather events cost the US about $150 billion, which is about $460 per person in the US per year. Due to direct impacts such as infrastructure damage, worker injuries, and agricultural loss, the author's report of that estimate. So also by prioritizing adaptation over mitigation, there's a risk of suffocating innovation in clean energy technologies and sustainable practices. So investing in adaptation alone may not motivate the development of low carbon solutions or advance the transition to a more sustainable economy. Um, so moving to my next point, it's rising sea levels. So coastal communities in the US are particularly vulnerable to sea level rise. So with over 10 million people living in areas at risk of flooding by 2050, rising sea levels also pose significant economic risks, with coastal property values at trillions of dollars potentially at risk. Tidal flooding is an example of rising sea levels. Damaged beaches, roads, and buildings are all affected by this type of flooding, which cause hazardous living conditions for people, so they have to relocate. And then my third point is public health risks. So weather and climate changes have been known to affect human health for years. Rising temperatures and air pollutions led to an increased respiratory illness and heat-related deaths. A study published in the Lancet estimated that climate change could cause an additional 250,000 deaths per year globally between 2030 and 2050. And then in conclusion, these statistics undermine the imperative future for the US to take decisive action to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. Adaptation and mitigation efforts are both necessary components. The consequences of neglecting climate actions are needed and at a far reaching impact, not only in the US, but the entire planet. To dismiss the urgent need for mitigation and adaptation efforts is to ignore the overwhelming scientific evidence which threats public health, economic stability, and environmental integrity. Embracing the fight against climate change isn't merely an option, it's important for the US to fulfill its moral obligation and to secure a sustainable future for generations to come. Thank you.
Okay, am I the one asking questions?
Yes.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, I just have two. One of them is pretty basic. They're pretty non-in-depth, but do you think we have time to fight climate change? And if you do, why?
I think yes, we have time. That's like a tough question because like your point of view, you guys think it's urgent, but on our
Right.
point of view, we don't think it's that urgent. Like I think we have time to develop more like sustainable and easier ways to have like good energy sources so we stop like having hazardous like waste and energy towards like us as people. So I think we could create like better resources, I
Okay.
guess.
Okay. Yeah. All right. For my second question, it's kind of a long one, but we've tried to fight and mitigate in the past. For example, we've tried to reduce our carbon footprint. We've created electric cars, and yet people still refuse to change. What makes you think that people will want to change now?
I think people are starting to realize that this is starting to become like an actual issue, but I think that we still like the first question, like we still need to like find better ways and more sustainable efforts to like um have like a better climate, I guess. Like I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question, but
No,
that's all I've got.
you're good. You're good. I get it. I mean, these are hard
Yeah.
questions to answer, especially when you have two different point of views. But
Yeah.
yeah, you did good.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. I'm Jack Billings. I'm the second affirmative speaker on our team. So our view is that climate change is a pretty urgent issue, but without using both adaptation and mitigation, it's going to be pretty bad. It'll just get worse. But I feel like if we utilize adaptation first, we could buy us some time to get these mitigation efforts up and going. So they're adaptations are pretty quick solutions. So like new farming techniques are pretty easy to implement, like micro irrigation, which is really like prevalent throughout the US. No-till farming and drought-resistant crops are all pretty good to keep farming sustainable and lower the carbon footprint from the farm industry. And then adapting to clean energy sources that we already have in place, like nuclear energy and wind and solar, because like we already use all of these energies, and if we just kind of focus a little more on them, I feel like we could really help out our planet. And I think adaptation is just the cheaper option because, as we know, the US is in massive debt. And one of your guys' questions was, where's the money all going to come from? But if we're having to move buildings and away from the oceans and stuff, that's going to cost a lot of money. And setting up new energy sources and innovation and all of that's going to take a lot of time and money when we already have a lot of the answers, I feel like around. Like we have the Avila Beach nuclear power plant, El Diablo Canyon, I think, and that produces 20% of California's energy, and that's clean energy. So I think if we just continue to use the infrastructure that we have in place, and uh, we could just buy us more time to be able to mitigate the problems we've caused. That's it.
I think I'm the question asker for this one. I don't really have any questions. I feel like, or kind of confused. I feel like one of my initial questions was like, how would you like split the funds between adapting and fighting climate change? Because like both take like a good amount of money. So like, where's that middle line where like this goes to this and this goes to this? Well, I don't know. Those I feel like you
Yeah.
kind of answered it.
Well, I think with adaptation, we're just trying to buy time. Like you can't solve the climate crisis with just adaptation, but I feel like if we just tried to mitigate immediately, we would just put ourselves further in debt and like further in a hole that we couldn't get ourselves out of. So I think like if you start off with like the cheaper option and just buy yourself some time, then we'd be able to use more mitigation efforts, I guess. I don't know, but I think like the splitting of the funds would be more up to the government.
Okay. I don't have any more questions, so I'll start my speech.
Right, sounds good.
Okay. So I'm the second negative speaker for this speech. Okay. What is climate change? According to the United Nations, climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Such shifts can be natural due to changes in the sun's activity or large volcanic eruptions. And what contributes to climate change? Well, the answer is quite obvious. Humans. Everything we use, everything we build, and everything we eat all contributes to climate change. The United Nations also states that human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. The main greenhouse gases that are causing climate change include carbon dioxide and methane. These come from using gasoline for a regular car or coal for heating a building. This shows that almost little to no energy that we consume are clean energies. Climate change is a huge hot topic these days, and it's not just because of rising temperatures. We often hear about adapting to the changes it brings, but is that enough? Shouldn't we be putting more effort into stopping climate change in the first place? Today, I will be speaking on why we should prioritize fighting climate change rather than dealing with climate change. In this discussion, we'll explore why it's crucial to focus on fighting climate change rather than just dealing with its aftermath. The first component would be social justice. In 2019, the richest 1% were responsible for 16% of global carbon emissions, the same as the emission of the poorest 66% of humanity, which amounts to 5 billion people. This is a quote from an article called Climate Equality, A Planet for the 99%, written by Oxfam in November 2023. In this article, they also largely talk about how the rich get to live such lavish lives by emitting excess amounts of carbon. Their short trip on their private plane can produce more oxygen than the average person emits all year. This data just shows how unconcerned they are for our Earth. For their private jets, they don't just take one trip a year. They are likely to take many trips a month, which adds up in the end and creates more carbon emissions. If we adapt to climate change, we're simply allowing the rich to make more and more unnecessary carbon emissions while we, the other 99%, have to work towards their doings and adapt. If we limit their ability to be able to use their private jet or even tax the rich, we are able to move towards fighting climate change. Oxfam states a tax of 60% on the incomes of the super rich 1% of earners globally would cut the carbon equivalent of more than the total emissions of the UK and raise $6.4 trillion to fund renewable energy and a transition away from fossil fuels. This data just shows how taxing the rich would have a big impact on the carbon emissions as it cuts out the carbon equivalent of a whole country, around 67.3 million people. And this excess tax can also be used towards funding renewable energy, which will move us away from the traditional fossil fuels. Adaptation is not a very good solution when facing climate change because it is just not efficient. In the documentary called Before the Flood by National Geographic, they show us a part of the world who tried adapting to climate change, Miami Beach, Florida. Miami Beach had a problem called sunny day flooding, where it would be a beautiful sunny day in Florida, but water would arise from the pipes and drains, causing Miami Beach to start flooding. In order to combat this, the mayor, Levine, tried to prevent flooding by integrating pumps into the city and raising roads that were most compacted by the flood. This whole project was a $400 million project that was largely funded by raising taxes. But when Levine was asked about how long this would prevent flooding, he said that it would only last about 40 to 50 years, and after that, they would have to come up with a new solution. This alone is just not as efficient as you would have to rebuild and rebuild after every 50 years, and this process just gets more and more expensive. Ultimately, at some point, there's a limit where you cannot build on top of the roads anymore. In conclusion, as we embark on this exploration of the urgent needs to combat climate change, it is evident that the Earth is undergoing long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. While natural factors contribute to these shifts, the primary driver of the current climate crisis is undeniably human activities. The United Nations emphasizes that our choices in what we use, build, and consume, particularly our reliance on fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, are major contributors to the increase in greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide and methane. This reality underscores the gravity of the situation. Almost every aspect of our daily lives, is intertwined with practices that accelerate climate change. While adaptation is essential, it addresses the symptoms but not the root cause. We find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the choices we make can shape the future of our planet.
I have a few questions.
Okay.
Hold on, let me find them. Okay. So, do you think we have the time and resources to like start fighting climate change without first adapting to the changes?
I read an article where it says like if we move towards like net zero carbon emissions, like globally,
Mhm.
if we move towards that by 2050, we should be able to like reverse climate change. But like, although it sounds easy, you need like everyone to like follow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That kind of leads me into my next question. So, like, what about countries that like aren't down for the or like for the mitigation, like India and countries in Africa and yeah.
I think I read that um outside countries, they're all like working towards like adapting and like fighting climate change already because they're like the most impacted by it.
Mhm.
And like I um I read that the US is the one who should start like actually like adapting and fighting climate change.
Yeah, because like
Because
people would follow. Yeah,
yeah, because a lot of countries are like, oh, if US can do that, why can't we also just
yeah,
yeah.
it's a good answer. All right. But those are my questions, I think.
Okay, good.
Okay, now what? Is it the 2 minute break and then rebuttal?
Yeah. If you guys want to take a break,
Yeah.
I'm cool without having a break, but if you guys need it.
Yeah. Okay.
Jack, is Maddie's our last speaker, yeah?
Yeah, so we have to, I'll call you right now and we'll figure it out.
Okay. Okay, great.
All right, we're just waiting for Ben to join back in, but our other partner in our group was supposed to do the rebuttal, so we're kind of like taking over for her, and this is pretty improvised and it won't be very long. So
It's all good. Last time we had a group that I guess like a group member left like a day or two before or something, and so they were like also thrown off. So yeah, it's all good.
all right, cool. Yeah, I'll just start the rebuttal then. So Ben and I were saying that we have reached the point of Ben, I've decided I'll just do
Yeah.
the rebuttal.
You just want to do the whole thing?
Yeah, and then you could hit like a little conclusion or something.
Okay. Yeah.
So we were saying that we've kind of reached the point of like detrimental damage to our planet, and mitigation efforts are going to take like a few years at least to get going. And we've tried to fight it before, and other countries didn't take up arms with us. And I think we just need to buy some time with adaptation before we go full. No more adapting. We need to mitigate. And then my other point I wanted to talk on was how you guys were saying that adaptation isn't effective or efficient in tackling the problem. And that's because it's not a solution. I think we should just use it to buy us some more time. I have a quote from the United Nations, and it says, protecting people now saves more lives and reduces risks moving forward. So I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much back to what Jack was saying. You guys have a really good argument, and I agree with most of it. I just think we're missing the sole fact that there is no fighting and turning back anymore. I mean, we've already missed our chance to fight. I don't want to miss our time to adapt. And I just think it's way too late. We've reached a degree change where it's considered detrimental damage. I mean, and we've tried to change and reduce our CO2 carbon, our carbon footprint in the past. And it just didn't work out. I didn't see really, there was no change in people's actions, whether it's driving their car less or switching to an electric option of transportation. It just really didn't work out. So we missed our chance to fight, and I don't want to be stuck on still fighting when we should be adapting and then miss our time to adapt. So I mean that's that.
Okay, I'm good to go if you guys are down to just skip the 2-minute thing. Is that fine?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
I believe
Yeah,
this is
go for it.
also sorry, yeah, I believe this is also just like the last thing I do, right? Like I'm the last
Yeah,
person.
this is it.
Yeah,
This is it.
Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, I'll just introduce myself. Yeah, I'm Joaquin Polito. Obviously, I'm defending the negative side here on preventing climate change rather than adaptation. So first, I want to respond to like the points you guys just said. Now, I think it's important to tackle that right away because obviously I have like my notes here on the side, and I want to get to that later. And yeah, you did point out here that with adaptation, we're preventing lives that are being that are obviously people who are dying now. If we were to prevent climate change, that would be something that we're kind of missing out on. And I personally don't have a defense to that. I feel like that's kind of a good point that you point out there. That's kind of where the whole argument of like adaptation and climate change need to work together and that kind of thing. But obviously we can't argue that. But you did say that you feel that adaptation buys us time. And I feel like that's true to some degree, but also I do feel like for me, I think it's the opposite. I feel like when we tackle climate change, we try to prevent that. It gives us and we have solutions now. Like it's not that we don't have anything to, like any solutions now. It's just that I feel like if we tackle those right away, the adaptation gets easier later on. So there are like ways to adapt. Sorry, what I'm trying to say is that the adaptations will have to like evolve basically. Whereas if we like tackle climate change now, the adaptation will be a lot more easier for us to tackle in the future. Okay, that's all I wanted to say for that. And yeah, I will be basically responding more to just like Jack and obviously Ben and Annika's points. And Patrick tackled a lot of like the social and like economic stuff. So thank you for that. But yeah, okay. So I said that adaptation doesn't have the plan that preserves the necessities of our planet like preventing climate change does. For example, if we don't take actions in helping prevent climate change, sea ice will melt at an alarmingly fast rate and permafrost will start to thaw. In addition, there will also be an increase in heat waves and precipitation. All this is according to the resource, the United States Geological Survey. And according to the World Wildlife Organization, there's also a political challenge that is faced with preventing climate change, but is currently being changed because this is an effort that has to be taken, like has to take almost everyone. Other countries would also have to be on board with this. Which in the year 2016 there was a Paris Climate Agreement, which was held and released to make a worldwide effort to keep greenhouse gases low. I know we explained earlier that I think it might have been a discussion between Ben and Annika or something, but something to do with the United States having to take efforts. But I think this is also just a worldwide effort, and yeah, obviously it is a very expensive thing, but as long as everyone's on board, this is something that we can start, to do right now. And okay, I had a quote here. The Wildlife Organization put into words that it's much like investing in a retirement fund. The sooner we act to mitigate the impacts of climate change, the better off we'll be in the future. Yeah, also I wanted to bring up the fact that I think Patrick said something about there was an article you read about 2050, something about 2050. I'm not exactly sure where you went with that, but I did want to bring up a point similar to that, how in terms of sustainability, which is our solution on tackling climate change now or preventing it now, there was a article that says that that we want all vehicles to be zero emissions by 2035, and that more than 239 million vehicles in the US roads could be electric by 2050. So that's kind of a similar argument there. And I think that that's a plan that we have now. Rather than adapting, this is something that we can actually do right now to later, or to start to prevent now, so that later adaptation is easier. And then on to my next point, I said, additionally, without any sort of mitigation, there cannot be any way to adapt to climate change so that there's any chance for longer and healthier future. Yes, it may be too late to fully prevent climate change, but by mitigating, we're actively slowing down the heating of our planet and making it so adaptation doesn't have to be so hard. Though there should be no reason to adapt at all if mitigation techniques are taken seriously. And even though there are benefits of climate change adaptation as opposed to preventing it and mitigating their effects, our argument, I still would say, is a little bit stronger, just because yours kind of cancels out to some degree. What I mean by this is that because some places that were once not eligible to grow crops become suitable, this is a benefit of adaptation. I don't know if we talked about this, but this means that there are some places that were once suitable will then be underwater or completely burned to an inhabitable level. I just think that there's an argument here in the people who are defending adaptation. There's this whole argument of how like sea levels rising, or like this whole like new increase of heat can actually help crops growing, or some sort of help on irrigation or anything like that. I think that it's kind of like this like balance out where it kind of cancels out. So some places, some areas of the world might benefit, whereas some others are not going to benefit. I forgot where I put that point in, but I wanted to add on to that. We also can't rely just on adaptation, because we have seen that in the past. The attempts we have made to prepare for natural disasters ended up being not helpful, or worse, it backfired. And in a sub-article on the Scientific American website, Andrea Thompson, a writer of the Environment and Earth Sciences bachelor's and master's holder in atmospheric chemistry, who's been studying climate change for over 16 years, stating my ethos. She teamed up with journalist Stephen Robert Miller, and they explained that there's an example I wanted to bring up of a 2011 tsunami that hit Japan, in which was supposed to be their attempt at adapting, but resulted in over 20,000 people dying. This failed attempt revolved around a seawall that had been built up to protect Japan from tsunamis and large waves that were anticipated, but not fully aware of its power. And so this kind of relates to something that you brought up earlier, I think, Jack, was something about the infrastructures like nuclear power plants in Avila Beach. I wanted to tie that point into what I just said now, because this is really important thing about how like infrastructures could be this false security. When we see that there are places that are like building, like you said, like nuclear power plants, or like in this case, there was the wall in Japan. We're preparing, obviously, we're adapting to something that's we're like expecting or anticipating. But when we realize that it's not working, or like in the future, if something worse happens and it fails, there's this false sense of security and safety that people are no longer gonna like trust or like rely on and fall back on. And there's one last point here before I finish. A similar argument was that they talk more about this other project. It's called the Central Arizona Project, and it essentially is already being carried out to, or it's essentially being carried out to be a canal that brings water to the Colorado River and across hundreds of miles to a desert. But this water gets transported to Phoenix and Tucson, but has been noted by many residents that who fear that it is a false sense of security, like I was saying, and that the water being provided is cut off and farmers are not receiving the water they need or expected. So it had just become this big misconception. Sorry, I feel like that might have been a tangent, but I think it really is important when it comes to the fact that like adaptation is, it may sound like something that we need now, but in the long run, it does become this it becomes like this false like focus, I guess, where we're kind of focusing something that we shouldn't be right away. And that I think something that I came up on my own, and I think is kind of valid on the way that it might have to evolve rather than if we were to just prevent climate change now as much as we can. That's going to basically just, I don't know, I just stretch it out or elongate the process. But listen, I think that we should just do them both at once, but that's not what we're doing here. Anyway, yeah, that's all I have, guys. I'm sorry if I went on for too long.
Oh, that was good. That was really good.
All right, thank you. So with that being said,
Good job, guys. That's
yeah. Thank you, man.
all right. So if I just stop the recording, it'll like send it to my computer.
Yeah, that's what he said, I think. So most, yeah.
Okay, I'll try right now.